He was called many things: the poet, the preacher, the lost soul man. But for years, people whispered something else. He's the guy who slept with Sam Cooke's wife. It's strange how history remembers us, not for the light we bring, but for the shadow that follows. Before the scandals, before the fame, Bobby Womack was just a boy in Cleveland, Ohio, playing a broken guitar upside down because his family couldn't afford another one. He grew up poor, too poor to eat some nights, his father calling it fasting for Jesus, while his mother told her sons they'd have to sing their way out of the ghetto. That voice, that hunger, would carry him from church pews to the biggest stages in America. He would share microphones with Sam Cooke, trade riffs with James Brown, and learn that music could lift a man higher than God or drop him lower than sin. His life would become the story of soul itself. The glory, the pain, the fall, and the redemption. So who was Bobby Womack really? A sinner who loved too hard? A genius who broke too soon? Or a man who spent his whole life trying to sing his way back to grace? Cleveland, Ohio, 1944. A small one-room shack on the poor side of town where winter wind slipped through cracked windows and hunger was a nightly guest. Inside that house lived the Womack family, 5 boys, 2 exhausted parents, and one unshakable dream. Their father, Friendly Womack, was a steel worker by day and a gospel singer by faith. Their mother, Naomi, kept food on the table when there was none to give. When their stomachs ached from emptiness, she told them, "Sing, boys. Sing your way out of this place." Bobby, the 3rd son, was his father's favorite, bold, fearless, defiant. When he broke a string on his father's guitar, his father threatened to whip him unless he could play it upside down, left-handed. Bobby strummed, awkward at first, then found the rhythm so raw, so honest, it brought tears to his father's eyes. That was the night the Womack brothers were born. They sang in churches, traveling through small towns across Ohio, sharing stages with gospel greats like the 5 Blind Boys and the Soul Stirrers, a group led by a young magnetic singer named Sam Cooke. Sam was the gospel world's shining star, handsome, smooth, the kind of voice that could make sinners believe again. When the Womack brothers met him, he saw something familiar in Bobby, that same fire, that same hunger. He told them, "Keep singing. Don't ever stop. I'll help you when the time comes." Back home, Bobby's father kept them strict. No secular music, no devil songs. But the world outside was changing. The lines between church and rhythm were starting to blur. By the mid-1950s, gospel and blues were colliding into something new, something they called soul. When Sam Cooke crossed over to secular music, he started SAR Records, Sam and Alexander Records. And he remembered those 5 kids from Cleveland. He called them up and said, "Come to LA. I've got a deal for you." Their father resisted. "That's devil music," he said. But $300 and the promise changed his mind. He packed his sons on a bus and sent them west. Under Sam's guidance, the Womack brothers became the Valentinos. He gave them suits, a sound, and a chance. Their first single, "Looking for a Love," hit no, 8 on the R&B charts, and suddenly, the boys who once sang for coins in church were on tour with James Brown. James Brown was discipline in motion. He demanded perfection every step, every note, every beat. Once, when Bobby looked away during rehearsal, James cracked him on the head with a drumstick and said, "You better listen." It was harsh, but Bobby understood. Excellence had a price. Through Sam, Bobby met everyone: Ray Charles, Solomon Burke, even a young Jimi Hendrix, who auditioned for Sam Cooke before finding his own fire with Little Richard and the Isley Brothers. The world was small, electric, and dangerous. In 1964, Bobby wrote, "It's All Over Now." The song did modestly well in America until a British band called the Rolling Stones heard it. They re-recorded it, and it shot straight to number 1 inch, the UK. Bobby was furious until Sam explained the publishing rights. A month later, Bobby received a $30,000 royalty check. That's when he learned what every black artist of his time had to learn. Talent feeds your soul, but ownership feeds your family. Bobby's bond with Sam Cooke grew stronger. They weren't just friends. They were brothers in rhythm and rebellion. Sam was teaching Bobby how to become a man in a world that didn't want one, how to survive in an industry built to break you. Bobby didn't know it yet, but everything Sam taught him about music, loyalty, and betrayal would soon be tested in the most painful way imaginable. By the early 1960 seconds, Bobby Womack's life was changing faster than he could understand it. The church boy from Cleveland was now living in Los Angeles, rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in black music. His mentor, Sam Cooke, had turned him from a gospel kid into a rising soul artist, a student in a new kind of classroom where the lessons were pain, rhythm, and ambition. Under Sam's label, SAR Records, Bobby learned everything: how to write, how to produce, how to survive in the studio and on the road. He wasn't just another background player. Sam saw something different in him, that rawness, that honesty that couldn't be faked. But even success comes with shadows. As Bobby's fame grew, tension built with his brothers in the Valentinos. He was working more with Sam than with them. And Sam, who was like a big brother, a father, and a prophet, all at once, was starting to change too. After President Kennedy's assassination, Sam began to write differently. He was reading more Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, James Baldwin. He stopped straightening his hair, started talking about justice and power. The song he wrote then, A Change Is Gonna Come, wasn't just a song. It was prophecy. When Sam played it for Bobby, he asked what he thought. Bobby said, "Man, that song sounds like death." Sam looked down, quiet, almost distant. He told Bobby he felt the song had come through him, not from him, like it was a warning. Then, a week after letting Bobby go from SAR to cut costs, the warning came through. Sam Cooke, the man who had given Bobby everything, was shot dead in a Los Angeles motel. The news hit Bobby like a thunderclap. He couldn't believe it. Rumors swirled a prostitute, a setup, the mafia, the record business. Everyone had a story. Nobody had the truth. All Bobby knew was that his mentor, his friend, was gone. The funeral was chaos. Fans screamed. Women fainted. Sam's widow, Barbara Cooke, stood beside the casket, broken and beautiful. And somewhere inside Bobby, something cracked. He wanted to protect her, protect what was left of Sam. When men started showing up at Barbara's house, looking for money or comfort, Bobby chased them away. He said it was loyalty. Others called it obsession. And when Barbara told him, "You keep running my boyfriends off, I guess you'll have to be my man," he didn't resist. They married just months after Sam's death. And with that, Bobby Womack went from being Sam Cooke's protege to being the man who married his mentor's wife. The backlash was brutal. Radio stations banned his songs. Fans booed him off stage. Sam's family disowned him. And Sam's brother, Charlie Cooke, swore to kill him. Bobby tried to move forward writing, performing, convincing himself that love could heal guilt. But the streets had their own justice. When Charlie found him in Chicago, he beat Bobby so badly his jaw split. His teeth pushed through his lip. Blood everywhere. And Barbara, furious that Bobby had taken the bullets out of her gun, stood there screaming she would have shot him dead. It was a scandal that buried Bobby's career. The boy who once shared stages with Sam Cooke and James Brown was now a pariah, unwanted, untouchable, unforgiven. But pain has a strange way of feeding music. And Bobby Womack, the exile, would soon turn his pain into songs that would outlive his shame. Scandal burns fast, but shame lasts longer. After marrying Barbara Cooke, Bobby Womack became a ghost in his own industry. Every door that had opened for him slammed shut. Radio stations refused to play his songs. Promoters canceled shows. Fans spit his name like a curse. The man who slept with Sam Cooke's wife. He was 21 years old and already living inside a story that would follow him for life. Out of money and desperate for work, Bobby turned to the one thing that never betrayed him: his guitar. He played for Ray Charles, working as a session musician. But even there, chaos followed. Ray was brilliant but reckless, driving cars blind, firing guns, trying to fly planes high on dope. Bobby said working for Ray was like living in a hurricane with a backbeat. From Ray's tour bus, Bobby jumped to another this time, with Wilson Pickett. They clicked immediately. Two wild souls with too much talent and not enough peace. Bobby wrote, "I'm a Midnight Mover," and "I'm in Love" for Wilson. Songs that turned pain into power, songs that helped define the sound of late 60-second soul. But behind the music, both men were drowning in cocaine, each snort a promise to forget what couldn't be forgiven. Bobby said later, "I was trying to get high enough to escape myself, but I kept running into the same man every time I came down. The hits kept him alive, but tragedy kept finding him." His marriage to Barbara fell apart after she caught him in bed with her teenage daughter, Linda Cooke. Sam Cooke's daughter. Barbara shot at him. The bullet missed, but his career didn't recover. Linda would later marry Bobby's brother, Cecil Womack, and together they'd write "Love TKO" for Teddy Pendergrass, a haunting reminder of how tangled love and pain could become in that family. Through the 1,970 seconds, Bobby's life played out like a blues record on repeat. Success, loss, regret, repeat. He recorded "Fly Me to the Moon" and "California Dreamin'," found brief glory, then lost it to addiction again. He worked with Janis Joplin, writing songs in a haze of drugs and late-night confessions. Hours after one of their sessions, she overdosed. Her death shook him, another friend gone, another warning ignored. But Bobby kept moving. That's what soul men did. They moved. In 1972, he wrote the soundtrack for the film Across 110th Street, a song about survival in a world that doesn't forgive. It became one of his greatest triumphs, used decades later in Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown. But even as the world danced to his music, Bobby was fighting demons backstage. He lost his brother Harry, stabbed to death by a jealous lover. He lost his infant son Truth, who suffocated after rolling off the bed, while Bobby, numb from cocaine, sat in another room, too high to check on him. He lost his oldest son Vincent, who took his own life at 21. Egg loss cut deeper, each tragedy another brick on the wall between him and redemption. By the late 70 seconds, Bobby was a legend without a home. Too raw for pop, too wild for gospel, too broken for peace. His music was still electric, but his body was fading under the weight of every bad decision he'd ever made. He once said, "I tried to write songs about love, but all I really knew was loss." And still, somewhere deep inside that chaos, the last spark of soul was waiting. And when it finally burned again, Bobby Womack would remind the world why they called him the Last Soul Man. In America, talent is worshipped, but only until it starts to make people uncomfortable. For Bobby Womack, that truth was both his curse and his crown. He lived through every era of modern black music. From the church choirs of the 1,950 seconds to the civil rights marches of the 1,960 seconds, from the funk-soaked clubs of the 70 seconds to the smooth grooves of the 80 seconds. He was always there. Guitar in hand, voice full of grit and glory. But while others rose clean, Bobby carried his scars in public. And America didn't always want to look at them. The same country that cheered for his songs had once condemned him for loving the wrong woman. The same record labels that profited from his pain would later call him too old, too dark, too real. He was both celebrated and censored, a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. In the 1,970 seconds, as the civil rights movement turned into the struggle for black identity, Bobby's music became a mirror. Songs like Across 110th Street weren't just hits, they were headlines. They told a story of a divided America, of hustlers and survivors, of ghetto dreamers and forgotten saints. It was a song about Harlem, but it could have been about the whole world. A cry from the streets that said, "We're still here." Critics called him the poet of pain. Fans called him the truth. Even white rock artists, from the Rolling Stones to Eric Clapton, borrowed his sound, his phrasing, his emotion. They love his soul, but not always his struggle. Across the Atlantic, though, things were different. In Europe, Bobby Womack was a legend. The British soul scene adored him. His records played in London's underground clubs, in Paris cafes, in German radio stations. To them, he wasn't a scandal, he was authentic. He embodied what white America tried to polish away: the pain, the imperfection, the humanity of soul. In interviews during that period, Bobby spoke softly about race and fame. He said, "They love you when you make them dance, but they don't want to see where the song came from." He knew what it meant to be a black man who told too much truth. He'd watched Sam Cooke for it. He'd seen Marvin Gaye shot down in his father's house. He'd buried friends who were too good for the world they lived in. Yet somehow, Bobby survived. He was never polished enough for Motown, never smooth enough for pop, but he was the pulse that kept black music alive. When disco faded and hip-hop was born, young producers sampled his riffs and borrowed his lines. Across 110th Street became a bridge between generations, a street where Curtis Mayfield met Tupac, where Marvin Gaye's dreams shook hands with Kendrick Lamar's reality. By the 2000s, a new generation rediscovered him. Filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino used his music to tell stories of redemption and revenge. Artists from Gorillaz to The Roots called him the godfather of truth. And when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, it wasn't just for the hits, it was for the honesty. In a world obsessed with perfection, Bobby Womack remained gloriously flawed. He sang about love, addiction, betrayal, and grace, the way only someone who had lived through all of them could. His voice was gravel and gold, his life a sermon written in blood and blues. To America, he was a complicated man. To the world, he was proof that soul isn't a genre, it's a testimony. By the time Bobby Womack reached his final years, his body was tired. A map of scars, both seen and unseen. Diabetes, Alzheimer's, colon cancer, the battles were relentless, but none of them broke him like the battles inside his own mind. He used to say, "The devil don't come with horns. He comes with a hit record and a bad contract." And Bobby knew both too well. Still, in his 70s, when most men were resting, he was still performing, still testifying. When asked why he kept singing, he smiled and said, "Because I still got a story to tell." That story, his story, was America's story. The rise, the fall, the survival. He had seen every side of the dream. The spotlight that blinds, the applause that disappears, the silence that follows after fame walks away. In 2009, when he walked onto the stage at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony, the crowd rose to its feet. For the first time in decades, Bobby wasn't a scandal or a survivor. He was a legend. He stood there in a black suit, smiling through the years, and said, "I thank God for letting me outlive my mistakes." That one line said everything. It wasn't about perfection. It was about endurance. His music kept finding new life long after he was gone. When Across 110th Street played in Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, it introduced him to a generation that never knew the church boy from Cleveland. When If You Think You're Lonely Now hit the air again in the 90 seconds, his pain became timeless. Even rappers and R&B singers began sampling his voice, that rough, righteous sound that refused to die. He called himself the last soul man. Not because there were no others left, but because few could still sing truth without fear. In a world of autotune and image, Bobby sang life unfiltered, unpolished, unforgettable. On the 27th of June 2014, Bobby Womack passed away in his sleep. He was 70 years old. No drama, no scandal, just silence. The same kind of silence that comes after a long prayer. When the news broke, tributes poured in from Patti LaBelle, the Rolling Stones, Damon Albarn, and countless others. They didn't talk about his mistakes. They talked about his courage, about the way his music felt like confession, about how he turned survival into song. Today, when you hear his voice, that raspy cry somewhere between pain and praise, you're not just hearing a man. You're hearing a lifetime that began in hunger and ended in harmony. Because Bobby Womack wasn't just a singer, he was a witness to the cost of fame, the price of love, and the power of redemption. And maybe that's what makes him eternal. He didn't hide his scars. He sang them. Some stories don't need a happy ending. They just need to be told by someone who lived every word. And somewhere, in the echo of a church on Cleveland's east side, you can still hear that little boy with the upside-down guitar, singing his way out of the ghetto and straight into history. Rest in power, Bobby Womack, the last soul man.